All right, so, with no minutes, the next item is the discussion of MCI, and we're gonna postpone that until 9 o'clock when she's gonna show up. What I think let's do then is let's move to the agenda item, which is called discussion of framework for economic vitality. Let me pass this around. This is the framework that was developed about this. Go ahead. Member. That.
I'll move this way, they can share that.
Mike, I have a question, and Mary just left, but Mary mentioned on Monday that she's rewriting the charter. Do we have an idea of what that is, or?
Essentially, it's cleaned it up, number one. And number two, to make it a little bit more proactive. And then three, one of the things we'll get to is this item at the bottom of this. You guys might know that I'm also on the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And every 10 years, the town is required to put together a housing production plan, which lays out what our concerns are about affordable housing in town, what inventory we have, what building opportunities are, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that happened when we did this production plan this year with the creation of the Affordable Housing Trust is there's been a lot of tension in town because there's a number of housing groups, CHBC, and they were all just running around doing whatever they did. And so the municipal trust decided that on a quarterly basis, we would get all the housing groups together to talk about what we were doing, to plan together, to update one another. That's proven to be extremely successful. The most recent example was CPC had 3 applications from housing groups, and they didn't know what the right one was to do, how much to actually do. So getting these housing groups together, we sorted it out for them and got back to them with a single proposal about how to do the funding. And it resulted in more funding for affordable housing than it was. So one of the ideas that's come up as we've been talking about this relook is for this group to convene on a quarterly basis all of the organizations in town that have something to do with business. The roundtable, the community chest, this committee, the planning committee as a result, and to see if we can kind of coordinate our efforts around building. So those are the things that were on, I think, Mary's mind that she thought about rewriting.
Mike, is there
Makes sense.
I think a couple of years ago, did we pass some sort of fund where is it a transfer tax? Somehow affordable housing is being funded. What's going on with that?
Sure, when I was on the select board, in addition to creating the Affordable Housing Trust, we created 2 home rule petitions. The first was for a property transfer tax. So when you sold your house over a certain dollar value, 1% of that sale price will go to the Affordable Housing Trust. The second was a building permit surcharge. So on top of the building permit charges there would be surcharge, and it would apply to not everything. So if you were going to put a porch on the house, that wouldn't count. But if you were, putting a whole new story on. Those 2 are home rule petitions, which have to be approved by the state legislature before the town can have them. They've been in front of the legislature for 4 years.
Okay.
As near as I know, the building permit surcharge has gone nowhere. I don't think it's seen the light of day. The property tax transfer is very much alive, and maybe potentially in the current governor's budget. That's not probably correct, but it's moving along. It's coming. If that were passed, the estimate is that would result in about $2 million annually to go to the Affordable Housing Trust.
And, one of the things, I spoke about this, the other night, is that, I think it was, disappointing, shocking to a lot of people that, either no one was paying close attention to our 40B compliance, or who in the town is sort of pulling this all together as far as the money, the plan, compliance?
So people were paying very close attention to it. For it to be, we had a proposal before the select board for the development of Junction Village. And after 10 years, what happened was during the COVID period, building prices or building construction cost went like this. So at the current finances, the company that was planning to do Junction Village couldn't do it without additional support. And that was gonna come in the form of tax credits. And the state said that they would provide additional tax credits as long as the town provided additional support. That's what- additional support, so it died. That left the door open for 40Bs. If that had been granted, they would have been able to get a building permit, and those 83 units of assisted living would have been on the inventory of affordable homes in Concord, and we would have been above our 10%. But it failed, and that led to the 240Bs, the one out, almost Acton, and then the one, over by the Baker Line.
And so does compliance sit in land management? Where does it sit as far as people keep track of it?
There's a regional housing authority run by Liz Russ that, keeps track of all of that stuff. And then we produced this housing production plan, which lays out all the affordable units in town, what our goals are. And that answer it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So this little rascal. Right. So this is where we are with respect to our initiatives. And I guess I'm interested in hearing from you about two things. What should we add, delete, and amend? And I think what I would like to see happen is for somebody on the committee to sort of be the informal lead person for each of these four initiatives. And if I'm gonna come in as chair after town meeting, I'll be responsible for the business roundtable that I spoke to you about before. We gotta find a better name for it, because that's what the business owners group is called, the business roundtable. So we gotta come up with some clever name, but I got nothing clever this man. So, communications and marketing, recruiting and retention, policy and regulations, and Concord 250 and the Economic Vitality Committee. So, thoughts?
I guess one of my questions, is, we spent a lot of time putting together the economic vitality manager position. Now we have Megan with her economic development background. Where does, and I've spoken about this before, where does our sort of visibility to what, Mimi and team is working on? And where is our sort of review and input when we go back to our constituencies to say, well, we'd like number 5 to be number 2 and prioritize this? How does that, I think for me, that's a big part of, because if we disconnect that, it seems like we're more philosophical and sort of academic in some regards. So I'd like to connect the two if possible.
Yeah. Well, I didn't prepare this agenda, but there isn't an update from Mimi and or Beth on this agenda, and I think that that's the first thing, that each one of our meetings, they're the managers of these activities, and we ought to be hearing from them, so that we coordinate what we're doing. So I talked to Mimi, didn't talk, email exchanged about this. She's got in particular an initiative that she's interested in. And so even though it's not on the agenda, I'm going to run the risk of violating open meeting law.
We on?
So this is, an employment empowerment act that I'll let Mimi explain to us.
Sure, Chris, do you wanna? So I'm just gonna share a screen, have a little presentation.
And it would fall under our heading, just so it's connected, under the policy and regulations component of this, I would think.
If I could just introduce myself, I'm Chris Garvey. I'm the risk and compliance manager for the town. I also do intergovernmental relations and, in addition to supporting the select board occasionally on home rule petitions and, tracking legislation that's going through the state, Mimi and Megan and I work very closely on a lot of, different issues. So, we thought it would be great to put together a little bit of an update on the Municipal Empowerment Act, for the benefit of this committee and also to the select board, in the next couple of weeks.
And I would just say that at 9 o'clock, when Megan gets in here, you three are the point people for the town's MCI
I think it's,
stuff.
I'm in a support role. I think that's me and Megan Finance, yeah. But yeah,
All right,
so
take it away.
good, thank you. Let's see. The governor proposed the Municipal Empowerment Act, a few months ago. I think it was January 19th. She's been on a blistering legislative, pace that the legislature is, trying to catch up with. The Municipal Empowerment Act is an update to Governor Baker's, Municipal Modernization Act of 2016. And Mimi and I have been taking a look at the MEA, and we think we can kind of break it down into three basic topics or groups. So there's extending COVID programs, there's providing financial tools for cities and towns, and there's authorization for additional local revenues. The lieutenant governor was mayor in Salem for 8 or 9 years, and she's been very actively talking to communities about our municipal needs, and she did a listening tour this past fall. And based on meeting with over 130 different town managers and administrators, came up with a draft proposal that she worked with her office to develop. So yeah, the MEA is comprised of 83 sections. It seeks to improve financial strengths and try to address workforce shortages. There are several things that the lieutenant governor heard with her listening session in the fall. So one was kind of easing out procurement rules for municipalities, and the other is staffing that the municipalities have to, we're not able to retain our staff, and so there's a lot of concerns about trying to keep staff levels stable in Concord and across the continent. So the other component was working on making hybrid meetings permanent, and a few other parts. So in terms of the COVID programs, they identify that during COVID, as we all know, they kind of suppressed a little bit of citizen participation. And so one aspect or one solution in the MEA is by removing the requirement that public bodies have physical quorum. You can have a quorum online, and then making this virtual meeting hybrid meeting permanent. So the legislature had a hearing on that in the past fall, and there was kind of unanimous support for this provision. There is some concern in Western Massachusetts that it's an unfunded mandate, and so there's some discussion going on about whether this is a requirement or whether this is just something that public bodies can do what they want. There's also a lot of concern about reduced revenue to restaurants, and the solution to that was by allowing outdoor dining. And then a third part to that was kind of loosening the alcohol licensing restrictions. So allowing restaurants to sell takeaway liquor. This particular issue on Beacon Hill, it's not clear how much support there is, but there is wide support for the hybrid meetings and the outdoor dining part. So in terms of addressing staffing needs, the MEA proposes kind of easing restrictions on post-retirement employment rules. So one of the ways we can address, municipalities can address workforce shortages by allowing retired police officers and firefighters to work for towns. Right now, there's limits on the number of hours they can work for those municipalities. So that would allow them to come back and work for towns in a small role. The state has also been exploring this local finance fellowship program. And they've devoted about $500,000 to it. It's a competitive program, and I think there's about 20 towns participate. And it's basically an apprentice program for people that are interested in municipal finance. The legislation also is contemplating allowing regional boards of assessors. And then it's proposed is based on feedback from police and fire to allow those agencies to appoint people outside of the civil service process. In terms of procurement, a few years ago, the legislature changed the mass procurement laws to require to increase the procurement threshold up to $100,000. I think before it was around $50,000 for our schools to require advertising of procurements. And so that lift, $100,000, made it easier, but it only applied to schools. And so this MEA now applies to municipalities. There's great support for that threshold increase. And then there's also an option for municipalities just issuing one RFP that to issue multiple contracts. Right now, there's really kind of like one service where you issue an RFP and then you do that. So that makes that much more flexible.
If I can interject, why that's important to us is that lowers the threshold for small businesses to be able to do work with a municipality. So that you can break it into $100,000 bracket. It can be very onerous to respond to an RFP. And it lets them kind of get a foot in the door.
There's also a requirement to not have to publish on Combis, which is the state procurement website. And then there's also a proposal in MEA to increase the school project bond term from 30 years to 40 years. So they are talking about it in terms of reflecting the life of the project, but obviously there's more of a financial benefit or component to that. In terms of other tools contemplated in the MEA, we have seen widespread, and as the risk manager, in fact, this morning, there's a few things we're working on around town. Just that no kind of city and town can keep up with the natural disasters that are impacting municipal operations. And this is happening not just in Concord, but statewide and nationally. We're seeing insurers flee California and Florida, and it's happening all over the place. So when the state has an $8 billion stabilization fund, there's a lot of debate and pressure on the governor to tap into that. Right now, there's been a lot of traction on tapping in on interest generated by that fund. And so what can we do with that interest? And so that conversation is very much in play. And one of the ways that those funds could be used is contemplated into the MEA, which is setting up a fund to address natural disasters where there's no coverage. The MEA also would allow municipalities to amortize emergency deficit spending for natural disasters over 3 years. And that was really in response to the flooding we saw in North Andover and Leominster last year. Would allow PEG access funds to be spent without appropriation, which is what we do at town meeting now. It would allow a means tested property tax exemption for seniors. So I went back and looked at that, and the town warrant this year has that in place. And basically be adopting the governor, Charlie Baker's, home rule grant from a few years ago, but hasn't been approved yet. So it's aside, so there's two tracks where that can be authorized. One is a town meeting adopting the home rule, or approving that legislation this year in April. And then the other is if this municipal empowerment act is approved by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, would allow all towns in Massachusetts to offer this program. It would allow for COLA adjustment for qualifying property tax exemptions. It would allow a one-time override for non-capital expenses. And it would eliminate a requirement for municipalities to print a physical annual report.
Going back to the property taxes, would it allow ours to stay in place, or would it create its own that we would have to adopt?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'd have to take a look at that. I know town council likes to make sure that home rule legislation is perfected after it's approved by the legislature, and so I'll have to look into that, whether we would need to, because sometimes there's a lot of fine tuning involved to mirror the legislation from the town and what the state legislature.
We have minimum income requirements and house value requirements, other asset requirements, which I don't know what's in this one.
Yeah, so I would happy to pull the language from the legislation and send that to you and the committee.
So on that point, my understanding is that that's perceived as administratively very challenging. There are only been some like 35 people who take advantage of that program today.
Yeah.
So I think one of the issues could be to quickly simplify that.
Well, that's why I asked, because what makes that complicated is you have to be in compliance with state minimum income, you have to file, I forget what it's called. You have to file a particular form with the state, which is,
Right, I think it's just administratively so hard or challenged or perceived as such. That except 35 people or thereabouts, no one's taking advantage of it, which is a huge shame, candidly, or problem. So hopefully it eases up the ability to access, the exemption for some next.
Do you want to talk about the?
Sure, it changes a bunch of taxes. One, allowing, the local municipalities, if they choose, to increase the local lodging tax and the local, meals tax. And it changes the excise tax, specifically for vehicles. And you can see it, basically, this is, not going to the states, this would be funding that the local municipalities could hang on to. So this is a little chart, I went and got the data, from what the town has received for local lodging tax. So the font is so tiny, the kind of 2003 numbers there, and if they were to increase by 1%, that would be $100,000 increase in state fund and in local funds that we would receive if we were to implement this new tax or increase the tax. And the local meals tax, which is probably a little easier to look at. You can see the dip is kind of COVID. For the lodging, that there was a significant dip also because of the loss of one of the hotels. Here for meals tax, the town would receive an extra 62,000. So it's not breaking the bank, but it is, notable, and it's one of those pass-through things to the customers. One thing for this committee to sort of see is like, would this be something we want to consider, both in terms of the impact for local businesses, would it have any impact?
and it's optional at the town level.
It's optional, it just gives the power, the town the power to do so.
What would be the increase, like, percentage?
It's 1%
1%.
for each one.
So maybe sort of thinking about taxes the other way. Is there a mechanism in place, or can we think about a mechanism in place to give tax relief in certain areas? So startup businesses, new businesses filling black spaces, dealing with sewer improvement fees and other costs. what's the mechanism for the town, if any, to offer, you know, you see the city of Austin, Cambridge, you see cities doing it all the time as far as tax relief, tax incentives. If that's viable at all, I think we should talk.
I haven't,
I think people are sort of tired of, let's just increase taxes without thinking about bringing more business and bringing, you know, enlarging the cost of the commercial tax base.
so instead of looking at taxes, I presented a budget to the town manager. To do some grant programs specifically for food businesses, so I'm working with a health director, because they're the businesses that have got a really small margin. And often have, they're kind of smaller businesses that are less capitalized, so that was around, it was sort of a combination of like advancing food safety and helping those small businesses. So that was to use some ARPA funds, so it wasn't necessarily a tax, because that kind of gets us into a whole kind of legal morass. A lot of the municipalities are using grants as a way of supporting the businesses. So that hasn't been allocated yet, but that's one initiative I'm looking at. If you've got some other suggestions. in
This
terms of
is
some of
this
the,
is a request for the town manager for ARPA funds.
Yeah.
Could you, not now, but could you share that with us?
Sure.
I mean, I think that's the kind of initiative that if we saw it, we could get behind and, you know, give Mimi some support from this committee to drive that with the town manager. So let's get that on our agenda for the next meeting. Would that be all right?
yeah,
Is there any, having a full year of food trucks, what's the economic impact? Is there an impact with food sales, taxes, what have you, that flows from food trucks, or is food truck sort of separate?
so we don't have a full year.
No, but I'm saying this year we will,
This,
right?
this year we
So
will.
24.
I think this year's gonna be an outlier and next year's gonna be an outlier. Right now, we're sort of, you wanna talk about the meeting coming up on Monday and?
Yeah, sure. So Monday, the Concord 250 committee is hosting a business 101 for the community at the library. At 6 p.m. In the Goodwin Forum. And on the agenda that night is public safety, to give the businesses an update on what public safety is looking at. Give all of the businesses a heads up on potential road closures and where public safety will expect to have closures during 2025. And then Melanie, our health director, will talk about food trucks versus brick and mortar food businesses and what opportunities might be for them, and to hear from them what they're thinking about. So we use an example of if the town is closed through traffic, what can Fiorellas do? I know no one's on here, I just threw that out there, but you know, and where can we put supplemental food trucks? So public safety is looking to designate the inside that barrier, so to speak, parking areas for one for first aid, one for food trucks, one for public safety, those types of things. So that's what we're gonna talk about Monday night and hear from the businesses. What are their fears? What are their logistic concerns? Like if the town is closed on Thursday to Monday, how do we get deliveries in? You know, really basic business questions is what we hope to talk about Monday night and get some of those answers in process, so that we know we have plenty of time to plan. We're just over a year out, so that we have time to think about how do we support our inside the perimeter, so to speak, businesses during that time? How do we make sure they feel safe and they understand what public safety is doing and they understand what the road closures are? It's really a way to bring all of the businesses, all of the committees, because everybody knows the Concord 250 has a ton of committees working on it and a massive amount of volunteers. And sometimes they head down parallel tracks and they're not necessarily connected to a municipal employee. So when we're talking about food, it has to go through the health director. And sometimes in everybody's enthusiasm, the trains move forward very parallel and they don't connect.
Yeah. What time, Ben?
6 p.m. So everybody is invited. It's open 6 to 7:30 at the Goodwin Forum. We've been promoting it, the chamber promoted it, the partnership promoted it. Tell everyone you know, tell everyone you know.
I hope when you're doing anything that has to do with the impact on business, that the committee would know about it, so.
I sent it to Jen but I it doesn't sound to you. I've been trying to make sure that everybody knows, and we did post it as a public meeting. And the Concord 250 committee has posted it and announced it to all of the subcommittees. So I'm hoping everybody knows it is the first. I'll just preface that. It's really the first. We had a mini meeting to focus on merchandising. This is the first of the larger meeting. We have MMTV hopefully recording it, so it will be available, and then we hope to do them quarterly. So that public safety, food, you name it, will be able to give an update. Mark?
So just a follow, so, is the case that unless a Concord restaurant, food provider has a food truck, if it does, then the sales of that food truck flow to the restaurant, and that's how meals tax, or, I still don't understand. So
You're
if it-
asking the revenue from the food trucks, do we
Correct.
get any?
And I'm not sure why, like 25 is an outlier.
In terms of the revenue from the food truck, and I just want to kind of close the loop, so let's just answer that question, then we can.
I just have
Yeah.
one more question.
So the meals tax goes to where their base of operations is. So, Reasons to be Cheerful has an ice cream truck. Their meals taxes stays in Concord no matter where. If they go sell in Boston, their meals tax comes to Concord.
Okay.
And so we're working with some of the businesses to have kind of mobile operations within town. And again, those meal taxes, it's just where their home base is.
And secondly, can't talk about 250 and can't talk about risk management without asking cell coverage. I mean, I don't, the town seems to like avoid it, want to avoid it. I just, unless we're having carriers bring in trucks and boost signal, I don't know how, or whatever it is, 13 months away. And we're still having Kai's Road discussions, and we're hoping private entities are gonna solve a massive problem for us. That's not only downtown, it's also at the high school, but let's just focus downtown. Where are we?
So let's wait till Megan comes back, so she can answer that question. So I just,
And the only reason why I ask is just that for me, it's one of the largest risk management issues facing the town.
if we can close the loop on the Municipal Empowerment Act question, because next Tuesday is the deadline for public comment, which I recognize is kind of a short timeline. Chris is going to be presenting to the select board on Monday and hoping to get a letter of support from them, and just kind of wanted to see if this committee might be interested in supporting it, or especially in terms of like a lot of these things folks probably heard are kind of things that are generally municipalities are great to support, which is exactly why it was created.
So you want a letter of support from this, we want a letter of support from this committee.
Yeah, so it's
We have a
pretty,
draft.
it's pretty short. I mean, I think we heard over the weekend that they had set up 2 different hearings. So the Municipal Empowerment Act, they feel like touches on 2 different committees. One is the Joint Committee on Municipalities and Regional Government, and then the other is the Committee on Joint Committee on Revenue. And so because of that, they scheduled public hearings. The first one was yesterday, and then the second one is tomorrow. So.
But a letter from us to the committee at the legislature or to the select board?
Yeah, so they, I have asked that the select board provide a support letter to talk about different aspects of MEA. We weren't quite organized to provide live oral testimony. And so the plan is to provide written testimony, and that submission deadline is Tuesday, March 5th at 5 p.m. And so,
Next Tuesday.
yeah, so it's on their, that's right, it's on their agenda, their consent agenda to approve or review a draft support letter.
All right, how's the committee feel about that?
Yeah, support it, yeah.
I would entertain a motion to authorize the chair to write a letter on behalf of the committee for submission to the legislature.
So,
Comments, questions? Yeah. All in favor?
We need a Zoom. One, get it, do we have to do a Zoom roll?
Is there anybody online who's a member of the committee who objects?
No,
No, the motion passes. All right, Chris, you and Mimi will help me draft the letter, right?
Chris, do you know if the Office of Travel and Tourism has weighed in as well because of the hotel and meals potential changes?
They have been very busy right now, focusing on two other legislation bills right now. So
Yeah.
one is the governor's bill, and there's a series of 9 public hearings that have already started to talk about that. And that will impact that office. And then the other is economic development bill that the governor previewed yesterday, which is supposed to be a mammoth bill, and we should see that draft legislation in the next week or two, and that really should speak to the Office of Travel and Tourism. There was also reference to or make it take my seat.
Yeah.
There's also reference to the 250th funding in this economic development bill, so.
And just, I want to go back to not comment on your remarks, but if this committee is going to be successful, not only do we need to have plans and be connected to what the town is doing, but we have to be seen in town as that group that's. So that was my remark to you, that if we're gonna be successful, we have to be seen around town as that group that's advocating on behalf of our business community, which means Monday night, I'll be at that meeting.
Okay.
And, you know, if there are other activities in town that are impacting upon our business community, we need to be able to be there, not all of us, but somebody needs to be there and say, we're paying attention.
And we are working on, I know we've talked about this and Mimi's talked about this with an email list, a more comprehensive email list. So we do have plans in place to add users to the system that I'm using for my tourism newsletter. So there will be a business newsletter, there will be a food business, we'll be able to tag it. So we're hoping to have a much more inclusive communication plan so that when urgent things or niche things go out, they do get to the right populations.
And you'll bring them here, so we
And
can
bring them here as
have
well.
input into that as well.
Yes.
Mike, on one of these verticals, we have communications and marketing. One of the things I've been pushing for, and hopefully you solved it. Do we have a business page on the Concord website?
We do, it needs to be updated. I started some work with Jennifer on that. And kind of, we haven't finished it yet, but it's in process.
Okay, so just super high level. My hope is that right now it says like, you know, residents, government, whatever. Hopefully it's business, welcome, here's Mimi, here's Beth. You know, here's the concierge service. It's sort of stuff we've been talking about for a year so people, to Mike's point about awareness. You know, it just, for me, it's just desperately needed so that we can just direct people to the town website and it's clear as day how to get there. Because now it's hard to find you. It's hard to find tourism. It's just, doesn't need to be that hard.
Megan, are you ready to come talk to us?
Sorry, this is
I showed somebody online that I couldn't quite get it.
Sorry, this is Ramon. I'm not sure if you can hear me. There's definitely precedent for that, Mark, as well. I mean, if you just go to the Lexington, town website, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, just to take the best practices, how other towns have approached that. But I agree with you. I think a one-stop shop for direction is critical for that, for business awareness and also new businesses that are opening.
Right, thanks, Ramon.
And Mike, I don't know if it's relevant or even appropriate, but maybe it's directing people to this committee if you have questions, or I don't know what the linkage is, if that would be appropriate, but again, I hate to think this committee is sort of operating in somewhat of a, not maybe as well known as it should be for the business community. I mean, the business partnership, the chamber, everyone knows us from that.
Well, that's part of the
The next
hope of
level.
putting this round table together is,
Okay.
as we did with the Affordable Housing Trust, all of a sudden, the housing community can speak with sort of a single voice when it's appropriate, so I think that will help.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you.
So we're here to hear an update on the MTI thing. I know there's a League of Women Voters event coming up that you're going to be at along with Simon Cataldo and Senator Barrett, and I'm not sure I remember who else is gonna be there speaking, but I know the three of you will be.
That's right, and, well, hi, everyone, I'm Megan Smudo, for those that, I don't know who's on the call here. This is a developing, busy time here in Concord, it's interesting how, sometimes things seem to be moving so quickly, but also will take many years, and that's really where we are with this, opportunity, and I would say my presentation for Friday, while this may be a little bit of a preview, is still actively in development. We had a meeting yesterday with, the commissioner of DCAM and, our representative Cataldo, members of DCAM, members of town staff.
People might not know. who
Oh,
DCAM
sure,
is.
yeah, DCAM is the, Division of Asset Management and Maintenance, or it could be Maintenance and Management, the two Ms. That is an entity, from the state that is in charge of the disposition of property. So when the state has some property that they don't need anymore, whether that's a prison or a state hospital, or just even, any type of facility that is no longer useful, there is a whole process about decommissioning, and that is to make sure, in this instance, that the operation is moved out. In this case, it's prisoners are moved to other locations, staff is moved to other locations, that the facility is secure, that, all useful, materials and files are moved and safely located. And then when it gets to the point where there's nothing else there that the state needs, it is, how do they dispose of it? How do they move on from ownership? And so that is the agency that, we had the opportunity to speak with the commissioner yesterday to talk about the different tools available and what they're thinking as far as next steps for the state on the parcel. So this is all in real time, as I mentioned. There's also an executive session in a few hours here with the select board. And they are going to be discussing this real property matter. So I think that I'm sure that will be a helpful conversation regarding priorities for the town. Where to begin? I mean, yeah.
So, I think there's a lot of sort of hubbub about opportunity and possibilities.
Sure.
So, I guess one of the whisperings is the town can buy the property for $1. Another issue is.
Do you want me to respond to that one, Mark? Or-
Yeah, well, the second
Yeah.
is the town has the ability just to keep it industrial.
Mhm.
So I guess the first question is, what ability do we have to buy it for $1? And then, then is zoning gonna stay the way it is? Is it subject to a town meeting voter?
Sure, yeah, to kind of take a step back, I think that our meeting with DCAM yesterday was really enlightening to me, members of the staff here, because both the commissioner of DCAM and the lieutenant governor have worked in other communities in the Commonwealth. And they have been involved in decommissioning of state property. And while this group here, it doesn't happen all the time, so it's for many folks, and I think DCAM would agree that their reputation is, they're really checks and balances of the common. So it can be a lengthy process, and there's a lot of thoroughness, and that could lead to time. And so for folks that wanna see something really quick, that can be difficult. So I think that hearing from the experience of both the lieutenant governor and the commissioner of DCAM, they had some ideas of how to decommission this property and see something happen there, relatively quickly in terms of speed of government, right? So they, what we learned yesterday is the way the legislation was written was to allow for the most flexibility for the community and the state to work through this disposition process and arrive at a new use that is, supported by both the community and the state and achieving both regional and local goals. So, you know, I think when you're talking, Mark, can we buy it for $1? Actually, the way the legislation is written is any tool is on the table for decommissioning. So there's a sales partnership agreement, there's a standard procurement process. We just spoke with a couple other communities yesterday that have gone through other different agreements between the state and the municipality. So they didn't want to prescribe a solution before the visioning process and community input and buy-in and site constraints is fully identified. So if we were to kind of say, these are all the things we want to see here, we're the town of Concord, you know, that is important and that will happen. But we also need to know what's even possible, what's possible from a real estate development perspective, what's possible from environmental constraints. We do not know any of that yet. So the goal is to work to understand site constraints, understand visioning and goals from both the community and the state and the region. And then figure out with all these things that we want, what is the best tool for decommissioning. And so that is kind of the next phase of, is it a sales partnership agreement or is it some other method?
Is there any indication of the future of Northeast Correctional?
Northeast Correctional across the way, the farm,
Yeah,
that is planning to remain operational. There's no plans to close that.
definitely.
That's right. It's a different program. My understanding, and I'm learning, like I said, in real time, is that that model will continue to operate and that there's no closure.
For me, the next step is the language that we saw with respect to the closure of Lansing Concord is language that has to get formalized in legislation. And the current language that's in there gives all of the decision-making power as to how this decommissioning happens to the Commonwealth. They could give it, sell it to us, they could sell it to a developer, they could do whatever. And so I think with, at least in talking with our congressional or our legislative people, the real interest today is to try to get some language in that legislation that gives Concord some say in this process.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, and I didn't get to the second part of your question, Mark, which is about land use and zoning. And land use zoning is a tool to decide how the community wants to see and envision a parcel, right? And so that is the strongest tool we have. It is zoned industrial right now. And if the state is interested in seeing something new there, as is the town, zoning is a effort that it'd have to go through town meeting zoning. And so if the state had this idea of, you know, something they really wanted to develop there and it didn't match with the community's vision, it's not gonna work. So that's why the robust collaborative visioning process is so critical. And, you know, to speak to the proposed legislation that is kind of being discussed and was brought up at the select board meeting the other evening, the way the partnership is laid out right now is the state is working with the town of Concord to determine the next step.
Never on the phone, Jan.
Jan,
I mean, say.
Jan, can you move your phone, please?
Jan.
Okay, so, you know, one thing that's, I've been reviewing this draft legislation and I can only, you know, I'm not speaking for the select board at this point, but, it does create an entity, of representatives that would.
You're talking about the amendment.
Yeah, there's an amendment, yes, this is like a little inside baseball, I feel like here, I've been like living and breathing this, and I feel like, thank you for reminding me to take a
Can
step
we
back.
take a little step back a
Yeah.
little bit? Because folks would be, one thing that was kind of key for me understanding is that there's a couple different things, this is one of the few times that the state has decommissioned a prison and is going to release it for sale. All the other ones have been mothballed, so I was sort of looking at like, what are some of these other prison closures and sort of seeing like, oh, it's been sitting there for years. That's because the state has, basically, they're holding on to that for the future. So this is the singular one that they're moving forward with actually selling. The state's interest is they're saying they want to see something happen there, something productive. They could go through the DCAM, which is DCAM's whole purpose for being is to basically make sure that they follow the letter of every dot, every I for procurement, in terms of desuccessioning. And that's incredibly onerous, and they recognize that's not in the town's interest, that's the nobody's interest in this particular circumstance. So the way they drafted this part of the legislation, so the governor could, with a wave of her pen, as she did, went and said, we're closing the prison. The only way that the state can make that available for sale is through a legislative approval. And they're bundling it in within that budget, which is anticipated to the budget to be voted on in the end of July. So there's still, some time, and it's obviously part of a big piece of legislation. It was crafted, as Megan said, to allow the maximum amount of flexibility, because right now, while we have all these questions, folks haven't even touched the surface of how expensive it is to do demolition there. How extensive are some of the historic properties that are gonna need to be preserved? Are there some environmental impacts? What about Route 2? There's so many agencies are gonna be involved in thinking about this, and the community's interest of thinking about affordable housing. How's it gonna connect with the rail trail? It allows a lot of flexibility for it to be broken into smaller parcels, to be phased, all this kind of thing. And right now there's I'll kind of let Megan then, right now, I think there's some concerns about, is this really in the community's interest? And I think that from a lot of the conversations with the state, they're saying like, we're trying to make this as most in the community's interest, because could be a lot of challenges with this parcel. There are a lot of opportunities. Until we kind of work that out, let's make sure we can allow everything to be on the table.
For example, in the current legislation, there's absolutely no money set aside for dealing with this property. If it's decommissioned or whatever, and it's a very old facility, so I don't know anything about environmental stuff, but I bet you never.
Yeah, I don't know if
The shovel that gets on the ground. I got, probably with the fire engine.
On that point, is it an as-is sale? Here you go, Concord. It can't be that.
I don't think sale is really being discussed right now. I think that the state is planning on maintaining control of the property. They own it, and they are working with the community for a visioning process, is the plan. And we have to agree, because we have to make sure that the zoning will match what the vision is.
Well, I just wouldn't, zoning, it's currently zoned for industrial property.
That's right.
And however, I think you have to, if you think forward, that it's, for example, if it would be sold to a developer, for example, and the developer says, well, I want to put 500 housing units on there. And the town says, I'm sorry, it's industrial. It goes to ZBA and then off to court we go. So I
I
don't.
don't know about that one. If it's not zoned for housing right now.
I know it's not
Yeah.
zoned for housing,
So-
but you can apply to have a zoning change, and when the zoning change is rejected.
It would go to town meeting.
Well, zoning change would go to town meeting,
Right.
but if it's rejected, it'll wind up in court, so I just wouldn't. Hang too tightly on.
I mean, it's the number one local control that communities have to protect land use, and it's really, it's not the only tool, but it is a strong one.
You
So
know,
I-
I just wouldn't bet the farm on. That, for me, the big issue is to get something in this legislation that one gets some money associated with this, so we could do an environmental study.
Oh, yeah.
And to have Concord of a voice at the table. So I think this is really, what an exciting opportunity, potentially anywhere from the town. And I know the governor has talked about this as a regional asset, so
Totally, yeah.
we just can't throw a tent over ourselves and say, call us in 6 months, we'll tell you what's gonna happen to it, so.
To that point, in sort of real time, I'm getting texts and emails of letters being written to the select board for the 12 o'clock meeting.
Me too. If I keep running out.
Yeah, I'm curious what that meeting is accomplishing, and based on what I'm reading, will we have a seat at the table with DCAM?
We do,
And
yeah.
is that sort of what the gist is that I'm feeling from Simon and others? It's like, maybe we won't be that.
I mean, I can just speak for the conversations we've had. There's a meeting on Friday with the Lieutenant Governor and, the Commissioner of DCAM. There was a meeting this week. And I think the question now is like, how do we represent Concord? And how do we make sure, I mean, this community, I know I sound like a broken record, but, the level of expertise, it still shocks me all the time. And as you know, I work on the 2229 Main Street task force, which is, similar in that the community has all of these experts in this town on things as specific as geology and risk management and international like experience with health. I mean, it's astounding. And the community has, or the select board has appointed that task force to really guide the research and thought process. And I mean, that's a model that is out there and is done in this community, and it seems to be working really well.
So, great segue. So 229 Main Street was in here last month. They have no idea what the purchase price could be. They have no idea how it would be funded. So I think similarly, if you look at the warrant articles, you look at the spending coming down the road to taxpayers. Seems to me the select board, the town is gonna have to go up with some sort of capital plan. It's gonna be the next 5 or 10 years, and how does this fit in? And if this fits in and that, we need to spend a significant amount of money, I can't imagine spending money on the old Stormette site. So we're gonna have to start prioritizing. I'm just wondering how the town is gonna start acting like, sort of a family budget as to, great, Christmas is coming, but we can't afford all the presidents. Start prioritizing.
I think
To
that's
me,
where the community input and the advisory to the select board comes in so helpful. I mean, as you know, that 2229 Main Street is doing due diligence right now, and they are gonna prepare a report to make a recommendation to the select board. Some of these things will still be unknown because it really can't get down to some of the real serious brass tacks until negotiation. But as much knowledge as possible is being researched. And I guess the point I was trying to make is that there's so much talent here, and this is your community, and so making sure we are harnessing all of that in a way that positions us as the best partner with the state is something I'm interested in pursuing.
Will the state be responsible for demolition eventually?
That's a good question. I think it's probably still too early. I think in some, in a model that we were researching yesterday, for the Westboro State Hospital, it eventually ended up with a developer who I believe did the demolition. So I think it's either probably the options are the state, a private entity, or the town, but the funding would likely come from a sale of the parcel to do this site readiness work.
just one footnote. So, with the 240B, say that's 500 units, with the MBTA, say that's a couple hundred, 50 acres. It's not unimaginable that there could be 1,000 units. West Concord can't support it. The fire station can't sort of support it. Willard School can't support it. Spending $100 million on the middle school, can't support it. So who's connecting the dots to say, and everyone, watch the news, right? The only thing they're talking about is housing. The housing crisis in Boston is the #1 issue on pretty much the nightly news. So like it or not, the state solution is housing based. And for a lot of us, and I'm in the camp of, we don't need more housing given our infrastructure. And if a developer is going to come in All right, we got to enlarge facilities, including infrastructural facilities, police, fire, schools. So for me, it's great to have the academic conversations, what the options are, but someone needs to connect the dots as to the services and demands, particularly West Concord.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the constraints are real. And talking about wastewater, I mean, there is a wastewater treatment component to this, but it's not unlimited. It's still very finite. If everything lines up perfectly, right?
Yeah.
And the school piece is enormous. That's why this cohesive visioning of what can be tolerated, like that's our job. To connect the dots, that's our job, or your job, the community's job.
Well, that's why I
To
hope-
specify exactly what have we identified in our plans in Envision Concord 2030? What have we identified in our housing production plan? What do we, what are our values? What do we care about as a community? What level of density can we tolerate and what do we want to see? And so that's an essential component.
I think one of the things that we learned from the Westboro example is that they had a commission that basically did a bunch of planning, recommended mixed use, but it wasn't grounded in reality.
The
and-
town threw it out.
Yeah, they threw it out and basically it's been 14 years. And all that's gotten built on there, they put some playing fields and now they're working on senior housing that still isn't completed yet. So I think one of, at least my personal hopes is that we can ground the vision in reality in terms of what the capacities are, what the community interests are, and think about it not being 100% housing and being able to really work together on envisioning that. And I think going back to Megan's thing of like, we do have the capacity within the town itself. And recognizing that the mechanisms that we've got is going to be zoning, but it's also going to be an RFP for a master developer. Or whatever kind of vision that we might have, but there's lots of other tools. There's a lot of tools in our toolbox right now.
Well,
To
I agree, but my hope is that the town will, there's three things that are really important. One, Concord has a formal role. It's not just, we hope we have a formal role, but it's written into the legislation. That we can talk Simon and Barrett into putting some money either in that legislation or as a supplemental piece so that we can start addressing this. There has to be some real work done to know what's possible there, physically what's possible. I mean, environmentally what's possible, infrastructure wise what's possible. All of, and that's gonna cost a lot of money, and I don't wanna see the town holding that bag. I know, but, so I
We
think
get that.
getting some money in this as a supplement to get some of this primary planning done. And also making sure that the state knows that we've got two other sites that are ripe for housing. I've not heard of a single commercial interest in 229 Main Street. I haven't heard of peep. So my bet, if I was betting, is that's gonna wind up being housing. And then there's the Junction Village property, which is right adjacent to the prison property, which is, you know, there was an RFP that was going out and then we pulled it back, given the CMCI thing. So there's already two very large parcels, plus the two that are already in business here for housing. And I think, so the state sort of needs that, so I see at the table formally some money. So the town doesn't have to incur, I mean, it's gonna be millions of dollars to figure out what the heck can happen there.
well, DCAM has a budget, so the state's,
Yeah, but what
Agency-
DCAM does with the budget is DCAM business, and
yeah, but some of, like you're saying, it's millions of dollars. I think this, one of the key roles that the town has got, like, in terms of like environmental assessments, like, that's what they do, it's state money. The community visioning, I think, is gonna be the key part that we really wanna do, and how can we foster a lot of conversations? Thinking about some of that state funding, it raises the stakes, I think, for MBTA zoning. Because some of these grant programs are gonna be contingent on, at least as we've seen in other communities, of like, if we're gonna go for one-stop funding, which is where in terms of there's a existing grants that the town's eligible for, that we're already working on applications that would help pay for this. We wouldn't be eligible for those if we don't pass the MBTA zone.
yeah, of course.
So,
Yeah, but again, maybe, yeah, envisioning in town is a great idea. And I know we will do it, but it has to be done in some kind of context. I don't, you weren't here. I don't know who all was here when we had an envisioning event here in the room about 229 Main Street. What should we do with 229 Main Street? And it was a free-for-all.
Hmm.
Yeah.
3 feet for this, 5 feet for that,
Yeah.
9 feet for this, 3 cats a dog.
I'm very much grounding in reality and looking at marketing studies, understanding infrastructure.
So all of that has to happen before the town gets involved in envisioning anything.
But I think there's some principles we want to think about that's going to guide it. And I think, some of the principles I already hear is like the town's commitment to historic preservation. There's a bunch of historic properties on there. Are we really wanting to protect them? That was one of the failures of Westboro. All the historic properties got destroyed. We want to think a little bit about the environmental impact. Folks are really looking at, okay, how could this be carbon free? How can we make sure that there's infrastructure that fits our values around climate? I hear a lot about yes to housing, but let's not go crazy. Let's balance this.
But let's do that in the context of some facts. How much would it cost to remediate property for housing? How many houses could you have there and not wipe the schools?
Well, I think that's the next step. So one of the conversations, and I was involved in this in Somerville, where it was a similar thing of, a lot of derelict properties that needed to be revised, and it was a multi-year process. There was a lot of community conversations, and a lot of it was kind of creative ones that maybe didn't feel like it was going further, but by the time it really got to the end, folks were on the same page of saying, this is how we want to balance it. And that community cared a lot about jobs. They, living wage jobs in particular, they cared a lot about open space and how to advocate for that. And they were really looking at balancing their tax base, so they really wanted to prioritize a lot of commercial development. And we're caring a lot about transit oriented. I think some of the other principles that I can imagine folks would have is, how can this connect with West Concord and make sure that it's not gonna, if we do this awesome commercial development, that everybody's gonna be there, nobody's gonna be going to the little mom and shops, how we can tie it in.
But maybe we'll be ready for no middle school by then.
Turn the bike trail into a 4-lane highway. Connected.
As a follow-up to Mike though, Megan, how do we get the input of, it's easy for us to say, more housing is a challenge. But the reality is, if you do the analysis on Willard, do the analysis in the middle school, go visit the fire department, West Concord, there are facts to say, okay, another truck is another bay. We don't have that room. We need a new building. So how do we get prepared so that when we say, look, we can only afford X number of units, we have the data to back it up. Schools, fire, police, services, what have you. Traffic flow, whatever it is, how do we build that? I don't want to say argument, but how do we build that, database?
Yeah,
But if a developer comes in and says, I want 1,000 units, well, you
Well-
can't have 1,000 units. Here are the reasons why.
well, I guess I'd approach it a little bit like, what do we want? And what can we support? As opposed to how come, not saying that you're saying this, but how can we say no to a developer's proposal? This is an opportunity to think about what we want to see here. And if we come up with something that is too grand for our capacity, how do we scale it to a match to fit within our limits in culture and Concord?
Yes, as long as we're looking at our capacity in a realistic way and we're touching base with the school committee, we're getting real data. I'm totally fine with that.
Well, it's gonna be an adventure, isn't it?
It already is, it's so exciting.
Well, it's a great opportunity. This is a generational opportunity, and the property down Somerville, Westboro, or the Fennar School in Waltham, I forgot what the name. What was it? Fernal School? Waltham, this scale here is slightly.
I mean, the Rotary, it's like.
When I was on the select board, the Rotary redo was moved off until 2043. And everybody agreed to side relief, but now it's it's back, so I mean, to think of traffic on Commonwealth Avenue and.
So was I the only person immensely disappointed in that Route 2 corridor presentation? The solution was drive a channel through the rotary.
Turned it into a river.
So,
This site is so laughing. I mean, if you look at potential development sites in town. This wetlands everywhere, I mean, this is dry, like, it's on the river, it's flat. It probably is contaminated, we'll see, I mean, we'll see what the level is, but that can be remediated, as we've seen with, other sites. It's a half a mile from the train station, it's on Route 2, it's on the bike path. I mean, it's just hitting, so it's on a river, and it's along a beautiful river with.
It has a sewage treatment plant.
Has a sewage treatment plant. I mean, that's what dreams are made of here.
All right, we gotta bring this to, Megan, thank you very much.
Sure.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
If there's anything,
Yeah,
you know,
there will
we
be.
would like to be advocating on behalf of the business community for this, but, when it comes time for putting together whatever the town is gonna put together to try to see if we can wrestle this to the ground in terms of our interests, I hope you will think about including somebody from, our committee. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. In the time that we have remaining, I'd like to come back to this little rascal. This is the strategy thing. I'd like to get somebody to be in charge, charge of these in the following sense. At our next meeting, what I'd like is to go through each of these 4 areas, and the 5th one at the bottom is roundtable, and bring us up to date. Where are we on this stuff? And I'd like to get us up to date, and then I'd like to see us start developing plans for how we're gonna attack this stuff. So I need 4 volunteers.
I'm
I'll
happy
take-
to jump on
Which
either
one
the
you want?
first or the second one.
You
I
pick,
feel like-
you're the first to talk, you get to choose.
Well, with the absence of Jen, I can work with Mimi on the communication piece, because that's sort of what we had talked about for
Okay,
years now.
okay, Cato, you're up for that.
I'm already on the IMA committee and 250 committees, so if you want me to take that, I'm okay.
Fabulous. 2 left.
Zoom people,
Which one do we? That's who we did.
Which one do you want, Steve?
Which one do we got here?
2 and 3.
and we can partner too, right? You could have 2 people that,
You can do anything you want, as long as there's somebody I can go, it's your turn, Beth. Well,
Did we see this before today?
Janet sent it out.
Jen had sent it out.
I did get the agenda. I can take the recruitment.
Way to go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, Steve, are you volunteering for number 3?
Yeah,
let's go.
that's right. Yeah,
Let's be apart. I would suggest maybe 2 people handle that, because that's a big one. I mean,
Who's gonna help Steve?
Marcus,
Mark? You're gonna help
I used
Steve?
to like you.
I know, it's all over now.
Thanks, Mark.
So my 2 cents on 3, Steve, is that there needs to be something in here about proposing amendments to bylaws to increase the height of buildings, to bring more commercial activity.
Well, that's why I want to get started on this, because I think one of the frustrations Jen had was she had an idea about some kind of zoning change that would have allowed for more short-term housing with respect to the 250. And Linda's committee, you know, has just been extremely busy with a bunch of stuff, not least of which is the MBT overlay kind of thing. So I'd like to get started on these and get them on the planning board's agenda as quickly as we can, so we, you know, we don't wind up getting 98 ball. Not getting some of
The
the
committee
stuff that
does have the joint meeting with the planning board on the March 6th,
March 6th, yeah.
which is unfortunately the same night as the community art forum.
Oh,
Because they had to move it from, normally their meeting's on Tuesdays and they had to move it to a Wednesday.
Okay,
what's that? What meeting is that?
It's a on March sixth.
Yeah,
It's a joint meeting, the planning board invited the Economic Vitality Committee, to meet, and I think.
okay.
I'm gonna be out.
Mike, are you going to that?
You're out of town?
Are you going to that? You're gonna go to that?
I think so.
Because Mimi and I will be at Public Art.
No, I'll go. For sure, and anybody else who's around, yeah, that'd be great. All right, any public comment? I don't hear anything, so I'll take it that means there's no.
Before we close, I've got a couple of things I wanna bring up to folks. I've got my age-friendly business initiative, which has got a survey, so anybody over 60, if you haven't taken my survey yet, if you wouldn't mind taking it.
We're
About your
looking
experience
for-
in local businesses.
Jeez,
I've been to some meetings.
that
but
kind of age
everybody-
discrimination, yes,
Yeah.
where's my lord?
And the other one is if folks want to stay a minute later, I've got, the West Concord Cultural District did a sizzle reel to promote the West Concord businesses. So folks might want to see that.
What is it?
What's a sizzle reel?
Yeah.
It's like a promotional video.
Okay,
It's on their website and on YouTube now.
any other, Justine?
Yeah, I don't know where we run into conflict with open meeting law, but I think up until now, the agendas have been pretty tightly orchestrated and not much chance for general discussion. And I think a lot of that has worked into today's meeting, and I think it's nice. I don't know what the right format for it is.
What I will be
Can you
doing,
have other business and just discussion and not taking action? How does that work?
well, what I'll be doing going forward, is I will be sending a note to the committee 2 weeks before our meeting. With suggestions for agenda items. I will tell you what I already know is gonna be on the agenda from stuff we've talked about and invite your input. I will say when I write to you, please only write back to me, don't write to everybody or we'll all go to jail. So, and that's how I like to proceed. And then give everybody a chance to tee up agenda items they want to talk about. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Well, if something comes up in somebody's mind, even from discussion here, is a way to discuss it without acting on it.
It's not really appropriate to bring up items, for substantive discussion, without letting the public know we're gonna do that. So what has happened previously is if you've got an idea, let's hear about it. But I would not then want to entertain a discussion with the whole committee, but make sure it's the agenda item for our next meeting, so we can have a full discussion and vote if necessary. So it's always a tricky thing with open meeting law, because stuff, and we don't meet. You know, it's different when you're meeting every 2 weeks, but when we don't meet them for a month, I mean, who knows what's gonna come up in the middle of March. So. And that I think is what we have to do, open meeting.
Like I can send you some time for next meeting, but I know that cell coverage continues to be a huge issue for the businesses in town.
Well, let's see if we can get the town to tell us where they are on this. I know, as you know, the locals who were there, there's 2 proposals on the town warrant for cell towers, one to high school and one to landfill.
Yeah, so maybe at the next meeting, we can talk to Megan and Jason about coming in and doing a presentation.
I was gonna say that's great, yeah.
That'd be great. It's been a perplexing thing for forever.
And then I know that I saw some correspondence as far as the new, as far as one of the warrant articles, creating a stormwater management fund. And there was at least discussion as sort of a tiered approach, which would put a big onus on businesses, for example, Deborah's, and so we got some feedback on. I think when it comes to allocating that fee and building that fund, some of our constituencies would have some ideas as to maybe,
Well-
boundaries.
If you'll note on the agenda for today, we didn't deal with warrant articles. So let's make sure we get that top of mind. And if any of you know points of view about warrant articles, get your stuff together and get the information to me. The other thing I'd like to do is when sending out an agenda is to attach to the agenda material. So there's a little packet of information. This would have been on it, you know, maybe we have the municipal empowerment act could have been on it. We might have been able to put some slides from MCI, I don't know, but send a packet out so everybody's got a chance to review stuff before we come here, so you're not going, what?
I love that idea.
I think one of the things we possibly struggled with since the committee was formed was to sort of have tangible, low-hanging fruit goals. This is it.
Let's get these things teed up and get them either done in action or thrown out and move on. So let's see if we can turn these things into actionable items. Last call for public comment or a comment from folks who are online. Anybody? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn that.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
I.
Opposed? Thank you very much for adjourn.